Hi everybody. In this video we're going to review Allied strategies, particularly American strategies for Avalon Hill's Axis and Allies Pacific 2001 edition. So Pacific 01 is a very unique and somewhat controversial rendition of A&A within the greater family of what is available today in the genre, and I'm not sure how often it gets played nowadays. Probably not a lot, since I recently bought a used copy in near mint condition online for like $20, and that suggests it's not highly valued by many people. I still think it's a great game, but I didn't always feel that way. I remember the first couple of times I played it opposed way back when I thought it had major problems, but I was a lot younger, 25 years ago, and I wasn't into mods and house rules. And furthermore, I didn't actually own a copy. I played on other people's sets, so I never gave myself an opportunity to really sit down and study it carefully and appreciate all the fine details that were going on within the radical asymmetrical design. So you have to really kind of pay attention to the first turn here if you're playing against a computer. It's the most important turn in the game where Japan is going to attack the Allies. So we'll just see what option they go for on their first turn. So it looks like a fairly standard setup where they're going to attack every single available Allied ship unit that they can reach, which means they're moving their Caroline Islands task force all the way into Samoa. And yeah, I actually usually don't do that with the Japanese. I'll use the Caroline Islands task force to attack the Philippines, use the home fleet and drive it straight south into Malaya. And then with the third group, just do the Pearl Harbor air raid, because it's almost impossible to not do that, because the U.S. Pacific Fleet is just served up on a silver platter for you. So yeah, it actually doesn't surprise me that the computer is going to go with the most aggressive, commonly used opening for Japan. As you can see, I'm not getting any hits at all here. Anyway, over the years, I came 180 degrees with my opinion of the game. I didn't necessarily agree with the more critical discussion threads that one can find on BGG that absolutely trash the game is broken. I don't believe it is, although on the surface it might appear that way the first couple times you play it. So with this video, I'd like to deal with the most common criticism of the game, which I believe too initially, that Japan is too easy to win with. The most popular thread on BGG covers this. And it starts with a guy who says, I never lose with Japan. No one can defeat this strategy. I've played everybody, etc., etc. It's over by turn 3. Well, when I hear something like that, I say, maybe in your group, if everything goes according to your plan. And it kind of reminds me of professional wrestling when the jobber runs at the hero and goes like this, so just he could get picked up and slammed. There's lots of dice, there's lots and lots of pieces, lots of options for both sides. So I'm always skeptical of absolutes in this case, and I'm always hesitant to make broad generalizations, but I'll play the Allies here on AAA against the computer on the highest difficulty setting with additional restrictions even, to demonstrate a beginner strategy that you may use to great effect against any expert player of Japan the next time you play opposed on a physical game board. So to save time, I just describe the strategy as the video plays out in the background. But quickly, for the uninitiated, A&A rules apply, save for a few important differences. Victory conditions are really clever and innovative. If Japan scores 22 points, they win. They get 1 point per 10-point income they earn each turn. They typically earn 2 to 3 points a turn. Or they win if they can hold India or Australia for a turn and the Chinese capital too. I've never seen them take the USA. The Allies win if Japan's economy drops below 10, and they can minus Japanese victory points with strategic bombing, 1 point per 10 IPC's damage per air raid, and that's always fun. As we saw, Japan gets a special first turn where they surprise attack the Western Allies anywhere, and every defending piece only defends with a hit on a 1. Each side has tons of convoy boxes to protect sea zones that, if lost, deny the collection of income from adjacent land territories. Japan gets 6 special kamikaze attacks per game, and these are targeted on specific ships in certain sea zones. Naval and air bases increase the range of planes and ships. These are going to be the main differences. There are minor ones as well, and I'll touch on them as they come up. And China is handled differently. They get 3 infantry per round less if their Burma supply route to India is cut. And one more thing I have to address up front. The ANA Pacific rule set spawned a really bad controversy surrounding an issue known as substalling. And that's when a player engages an enemy task force with a sub and then immediately submerges before any combat occurs. And the official rules on pages 14 and 15, the way they are worded, seem to permit this tactic. Although, to me and everyone I played with head-to-head assumed that was not the original intent of the design, so we never did it. And I think Larry Harris eventually confirmed that subs should fight at least a round before submerging. But I think he's like me in a sense, in that we're the type of people who feel it's your game, so you play it however you like, as long as your rules stay consistent. However, some people are convinced Japan can substall their way to victory, sacrifice a sub in every important sea zone to the USA just to bog them down. But I don't think so. The Allies can counter it, and we might see that situation play out here. I should also mention the AAA software, by the way, doesn't model fighter escorts during strategic bombing or CAP over Navy task forces precisely the way it's handled with the physical game board, although I don't think it should matter for the purposes of this video. I also noticed that in this game, transports can soak hits, but they can't actively defend, which is weird, but whatever. I will also be using build restrictions with the Allies as an optional rule. This prevents the British from building huge infantry stacks in India, or the USA from buying all bombers or all of any one kind of unit. So this forces the Allies to mix it up with their builds. So what I've noticed over time is that the toughest players of Japan usually play for the point victory. In other words, they don't try to hustle India out early game. The computer certainly doesn't play that way either. And there are a couple of reasons for this, I think. One is that it means you will be at some point going for broke in large attacks at suboptimal odds. So it's a rather reckless and dangerous style of play. 2, it absolutely telegraphs your intentions from the jump and locks Japan into a gambit that can be countered, in my opinion, because the Allies know exactly what you're trying to do. And you can take measures to prevent it. For example, how about flushing? I call it flushing the toilet. Flushing the entire Chinese army into the Shan state via Hunan to start. China's such a pushover in this game, it doesn't really matter. So if Japan's going for broke against India early, you could just sacrifice the entire country. I know it's easier said than done, but it goes a long way to prevent that from happening. And if Japan tries to ignore the USA while they're doing this, they get smoked by the US Pacific Fleet a lot sooner than they can ever imagine. And it can happen quick in this game. If we see this coming, we'll deal with it accordingly. But in the meantime, we have to ask what is to be done about the Japan problem as we see it now. So if you're the Allies, I say keep it simple and don't panic. If Japan plays for victory points, you play for victory points. You don't try to invade Japan proper, you blow up their economy, so you fight fire with fire. I like infantry for India every turn. I like spoiling attacks by the UK troops and Chinese troops, retaking territories with the bare minimum amount of force. Never, ever risk aircraft in these little spoiling attacks. I like building submarines every turn out of Australia, New South Wales. 3 subs built out of there might be viewed as a mistake by the Japanese player on the first turn. Might even laugh at you. But 3 more subs on turn 2, I think is going to at least raise an eyebrow across the table. 9 subs by turn 3 will mean a full-blown emergency for the Japanese, even if they weren't willing to acknowledge it. Why do I say this? Because this absolutely skewers the bad guys on a horrible dilemma. The IJN has to spread out and cover all their convoy boxes, otherwise the enemy subs will literally switch off their economy. But the problem is the US Pacific Fleet is coming. And the IJN can't hope to stand against it if it's dispersed covering shipping lanes. And that's the crux. That's the checkmate. So how do you set up the American response? Build aircraft carriers, fully outfitted, until you have more than the Japanese. Always count and compare units. Battleships are even good in this game. All the ships are, in fact. Take a mental tally of how many planes the Japanese can hit your fleet with, whenever, wherever, with whatever. Keep building until your fleet is so big it would seem near suicidal for the Japanese to attack it. And it should take 3 turns tops. The one rule of thumb with respect to early game builds should be no heavy bombers. And I hate to say it, they're fun to use in this game, but it's folly to invest in them before you gap the IJN with surface fleet units. Trust me, you have to risk the temptation to buy bombers. You have to crush the IJN with numbers of ships, then use a fairly standard port of call ladder attack towards the east coast of China. You always take advantage of the port movement bonus. So it's going to be Hawaii, then the Caroline Islands, or even New Britain as a backup because there's an alternate route in this map. And then it's the Philippines or bust. After you General MacArthur the show, you can congratulate yourself because the Japanese strategic position is always hopelessly forked by a strong American presence in the Philippines. Kwantung Army is about to be cut off on the continent, and all of Japan's major convoy zones are threatened from that point as well. And you didn't even touch the kamikaze hotspots. You can mess with your opponent too if you're into propaganda and trash talk. I typically don't play like this, but the people I do play are like big time into this. So I have experience with it. You can pick up and count units in Japan in and around the home islands, threaten a decapitation strike. Your opponent won't know it's a bluff. And they might even recoil or collapse into a shell with infantry builds. And that's good since you are going to take everything except Japan itself for the win. And from there, it's an all-out assault on all Japanese sources of income, whether it be convoy zones or islands. I argue that Anglo-English submarines combined with the U.S. Pacific Fleet is enough to overload the defensive perimeter of the greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere before Japan gets to 22 VPs. And I know what you're thinking. Admiral Yamamoto might have something to say about this. IJN isn't just going to sit back and do nothing. And I agree. It's going to be forced to attack the U.S. Pacific Fleet at unfavorable odds. And every time it does this, they're going to lose 20 to 30% of their entire Air Force permanently and not be able to replace the losses. And America can always build new ships and planes. And when the dust settles, ultimately and shockingly for the Japanese player, it still might be death by submarine warfare. Because even if they sting or defeat the American surface fleet in a set-piece battle, what can they do about all the submarines infesting their waters? By the way, the Japanese knew this might happen in real life. And it's probably, or you could argue, it was one reason why they attacked the USA in the first place. Because I've read in 1941, they realized that America already had the largest concentration of submarines in the world based out of the Philippines pre-war. Like, it was in the high 30s, like the number. And for what other purpose than to injure Japanese designs in the region? So they felt cornered, threatened, and humiliated by the West, and for a number of reasons, but that was one of them. Of course, the game doesn't really make a lot of strategic sense for the Japanese if you don't consider the intangible political factors, and that's, I guess, one big knock on ANA, the total absence of politics, explanations, and motivations, which without those, the strategic situation always seems hopeless for Japan. Anyway, so we'll talk specifically about some of the action here. Yeah, so turn 2, Japan is doing what they need to do, attack and to drive deeper into China. They took the Philippines. this opening you see is probably it favored attacking Allied naval units as opposed to taking territories. So I've seen people play this way before. China getting squeezed. One of the things that I did not like about this game when I first played it was the rendering of China. It's too weak. I've harped on this so many times with other versions of Axis and Allies, but in this game it really bugged me. It's just an embarrassing sock puppet of America that can be pushed over so easily. I realized that the designers had to make it this way to have a compelling game, obviously, but it's frustrating to see China just like melt like nothing. The familiar disappearing act they always do in these games. So another problem with the way the computer opened with Japan is they kind of, if you go after Samoa, the U.S. Pacific Fleet, the one carrier in Samoa, and with the home fleet attack the Philippines, that means you leave, or you let the British aircraft carrier off the hook south of India, and it can rendezvous with Australian ships, and it can be a problem later in the game. So that's a tough choice for the Japanese player. Like, do you eradicate the entire U.S. Pacific Fleet, or make that one compromise and deal with the British first? So you can see here there's still at least somewhat of a viable Anglo Navy, British Navy. And even though in this version India is restricted from just buying all infantry, like there's still options. Like an airplane is a good option if India itself is not in imminent danger of falling. You can go with a tank or an artillery. The transferable IPCs in the sea, like there's 12 of them, I think, spread across 3 sea zones. Unless India is like in dire straits, I usually give those to Australia for submarine purchases. Japan has Hong Kong, took Singapore, the southern tip of the Malayan Peninsula, half of New Guinea. They're still on the move. They're getting stronger, but allies are knocked back, but they're still in it for sure. It's just it can feel overwhelming when you play the Japanese side in this on the physical game board. It's actually, I would even go as far as to say, kind of unpleasant at the beginning, because the game doesn't come with planning pieces and there's just a ton of plastic on the board, and it's like so confusing and messy. And I also really didn't like the fleet like plaques, those blue things. I just, ugh. I thought they could have been better, like more attractive. Although they are functional. Yeah, the physical game took a lot of getting used to. It's like with time, I would say it's one of my favorite games to set up and just kind of look at and play solitaire, actually, like trying to experiment with opening moves and also modding it and stuff, trying different little upgrades and extra pieces. And for sure that is going to be a future video, because I do have the physical copy and I spent a lot of time and money doing upgrades. So probably in the near future you'll see a top 10 gameplay tips and mods for ANA Pacific 2001 as a future video. But you can see the Americans building up here. I scraped the sunken battleships off the bottom of Pearl Harbor first turn. If the U.S. Pacific Fleet isn't going to be threatened with a subsequent attack, like it's safe to rebuild those battleships, I do it. 2 is sufficient. And you always do the pinprick little counterattacks with China on America's turn as well, if you can get away with it. But like I said in the intro, if Japan is trying to hustle India out of the game quick, I just flush every single Chinese unit south as fast as possible in like meat wave attacks into Burma to kind of slow down the Chinese, or sorry, slow down the Japanese advancement towards India. So you can see the big build up in Hawaii already. The aircraft carrier construction will begin next turn. Japan's looking strong. Also, what I like to do is you can see there's two there. What is it? Bonin and I think it's called Ryukyu Islands. They're both little island chains south of the main Japanese home islands. They're each worth 1 IPC. They are usually not heavily defended, so I will bait if I in the mood, I guess, and not feeling threatened, the Japanese with maybe 1 transport to see if I can get them to spend a kamikaze on it. But that's it. Those other kamikaze zones I won't enter, really, unless it's with submarines. A lot of people, or a lot of first-time players of this game, and I was one of them too. When I played America the first time, this will happen. Typically, you can have your game ruined or lost as Japan is closing in on the 22-point victory limit, and you're just about to knock out Japan, but the kamikazes, you sink a couple transports, and then it ruins everything at the very last minute. They can't save the game for Japan at the last second in the nick of time. So, and you have that happen to you a couple times, and you learn never to allow that to happen again. You just don't go in there with an invasion fleet, since you can dismantle the entire Japanese economy through submarine warfare and stranding the Kwangtung army on the continent without reinforcements. It's easier to do that. then invade the home islands. Yeah, I left a transport hanging there. It's not good. I mess up a lot too. You can see. Hard to get used to when you're an old school player of Axis and Allies and you forget about the added range bonus for the air bases. And here looks like it's going to be the end of the British ships. Yeah, I got wiped finally. But you notice it cost the Japanese a lot of aircraft, and it's always permanent losses for Japan when that happens. So it always comes at a cost. Those set piece battles or decisive showdowns they were always looking for. That was the dream of the IJN, was to defeat the Western Allies in huge showdown battles in hopes that it would break morale. Because they knew they couldn't compete with the West in terms of resources and everything. I think in the 40s, the USA maybe had twice the population of Japan. The US alone did. And I think I read they had like 5x the Japanese like amount of steel. And they also had unlimited oil reserves, and Japan was running a deficit of oil. They were like minus oil every month. So yeah, they had to score these spectacular defeats against the West in hopes that it would just break the Western will to continue to fight, because the Japanese believed at heart, the Americans were businessmen, and they would come to the realization that this type of thing was a waste of money and resources, and they could only think in economic terms and all that stuff. A lot of racism that went both ways really warped people's reasoning and hopes and expectations. And another thing I like to describe to you, it's maybe my favorite anecdote in respect to the history of the Pacific War. And it comes from a book called Shattered Sword by Parshall and Tully. But I've seen it described in other resources, and it's a story about the Japanese general staff, and this is they did it pre-Pearl Harbor and pre-Midway. They would gather on the super battleship Yamato and play paper and pencil war games with Japanese admirals, like a certain group playing American forces and a certain group playing the Japanese forces, and they had umpires and everything, right? A whole rule set, and they would try and play out the battle of the Pacific Ocean on paper to see, test their plans to see what was viable and what was not, supposedly. And in one particular case, the admiral who was playing America defending Midway, like he rolls a ton of hits against the Japanese carrier group with land-based bombers. I think like even B-17s, which proved to be, it didn't happen that way in real life. But still, there's rules made by the Japanese. So he rolls up 9 hits, and the umpires say, okay, well, you're going to have to take 3 carriers off the board here. And an admiral, I guess it was Yamamoto's chief of staff, I think it was a man named Ugaki, he overruled like the results. I don't even think the poor guy got a re-roll. He said, nah, that's BS. That the Americans would never respond that way. They're not that aggressive. They just, you know, totally like wrote the Americans off. And so they got all these like warped like expectations about, you know, what the US were capable of doing to them. And then like sunk ships too. Like they would have the sessions would span multiple days. So as the dust settles, day 1, okay, everyone comes back for day 2, and ships that were lost the previous day reappeared on the board magically because the admirals just absolutely refused to believe that they could be defeated by the Americans. I mean, which is crazy. Like, Americans knew that Japanese were trying to kill them. Like, what are you talking about? They're not going to take risks. They're not going to do everything they can to stop it. But anyway, it worked. Those kind of racist attitudes certainly went both ways. There's no doubt about that. I mean, the Americans had such a horrifically low opinion of the Japanese soldiers as well too, and that stung them. Places like Iwo Jima and all of them. In fact, the mini atoll battles usually were bloody beyond expectation. Anyway, so you have the move to the Caroline Islands. That corridor was open. I didn't have to divert south to New Britain. See, that's the thing with the substalling theory. I think it discounts the fact that there's a couple of ways to get to the eastern coast of China fairly quickly, and Japan can't very well spend all their income wasting submarines to stall the US. Like, the Allies can do the same tactic to the Japanese, only worse. So I think I'm not saying it's not possible to win with the Japanese. It is possible. But certainly the effectiveness of that substalling strategy, I think, is overstated. Against an experienced Allied player, it's probably on its own not going to be enough to stop the Allies. You would have to play a really cagey cat and mouse game with the US Pacific Fleet and keep your IJN intact for as long as possible. I've seen really good Japanese players sail it south around like Australia, so it's hidden back in there until late game, really hard to reach, and sort of you can come out and snipe transports or weak places. It can park itself off the coast of New South Wales and basically shut down the Australian player as well. I've seen that. It's hard to deal with. Like, it's not simple for either side. But I'm just saying that what I'm doing here is enough to turn a novice player into like a really challenging problem for even the best players of Japan, because adopting this strategy with the Americans and then the British allies it's tough. It just overloads the Japanese everywhere, no matter what they try to do. So you can see I'm poised Caroline Islands. IJN in this game is dispersed somewhat. They took losses. Like there's always that trade-off. If you attack Samoa on the first turn, you will take losses. That degrades the Japanese Navy and its naval air power. It also had a confrontation with the British so far, so that that comes with a cost. So it's had 2 knocks against it. Usually the Japanese have enough power and stamina to take, I don't know, 3 or 4 strong punches to the jaw before they're down and out for the count. So you can see, yeah, I mean, it's what's left is fairly dispersed already, and now with the remnants of the British Navy in the Pacific Ocean, they're back in the Philippines. So Japan's got, yeah, you can see the counterattack overloaded with air power. And yeah, they destroyed the British, but at what cost to them? You can see they lost 4 fighters. 4 fighters is going to be like $48. That's going to take 2 game turns to replace those losses alone for Japan in the best case scenario. How are they, supposed to maintain their army on the continent or their navy if they're gonna? I mean, it's so tough. I mean, I give the computer credit here. It's squeezed the squashed China, and it took the large islands in the south there, like Java and Sumatra and Malaya. It's doing a rendition of what it's supposed to do. However, yeah, so what the remnants are parked off the coast of Borneo there, and they have their convoy routes still, but not for long. And that's the key, right? Like, see, the fleet is reduced, and it just simply cannot cover all those convoy routes if Australia is spamming submarines. There's 3 more coming. The Allied octopus has 8 tentacles, and the Japanese can only deal with 1 or 2 at a time. So, in fact, the USA does have the means at its disposal and strength of will I'd like to hear from people in the comments what they think about this game. Like I said, if you're highly critical of it and think it needs house rules and stuff, I was the same. I was the same way for sure. And I've said before, it's the very first time I played an Axis and Allies game, and this is as a fan of. Well, I wouldn't say fan, but like I'm really, really interested in World War II history, Pacific War history, and I thought, wow, like this got some problems. This game out of the box, but with time, you kind of, in distance, you can get a better appreciation of the elements that did go into it, and yeah, you can find solutions to the things you don't like about the game. If it, other people I've talked to really like it. They liked it initially too. So yeah, here's another example of teasing the the Japanese player with a single transport with a single infantry. I would do that in the Ryukyu Islands and Bonin. That's it though, because the Japanese players, well, this might be the only opportunity I get to use a kamikaze, but are they going to waste it on one transport that's got a single infantry unit on it for one IPC territory? Would I, if I was Japan? I think I would, because I know that every IPC counts. And they're not really that effective in this. Like only 6 hit on a what is it, a 1 or 2? But on the other hand, I've seen them win the game at the nick of time, and that has happened to me for sure. See, this, like, the game is but 4 turns old here, and you can already see the Japanese in all kinds of trouble. And there are ways for Japan to mitigate this type of situation. The computer, I think, just kind of melted under the pressure. I don't know, you could say this video could also have the subtitle, how not to play Japan against the Allies. I will say this, I guess. I like to keep the IJN viable for as long as possible. I like to be unpredictable. I like to play the cat and mouse game with the USA. Like, I never try to do the quick victory thing for Japan. I always go for those victory points, the victory point one. And if I am going to lose with Japan, I make the American player defeat me by attacking, into something that may resemble like an ambush or a trap, like like maybe they wipe out my ships, but in a counterattack with bombers or planes, that like I can clean them out, and that would be just enough time to put me over the 22-point threshold or something like that, right? That's what I like to do. I think a lot of the main way the Allies lose this game is by misspending with strategic bombers. It's so tempting to do because you roll back those victory points with the IPC damage. I build the bombers only if I have a very confident feeling that I'm going to win the game. Only after. So it's not before. Like if I say, okay, like I've got this, then if I build a bunch of other stuff and I have 15 left over, okay, then I will buy those heavy bombers. But I'm not good with them anyway. They're hard to use, I find. They can be attacked if you're not careful. Defending at a 1, But yeah, that might be a surefire way to lose as the Allies. Misappropriation of your war funds. You just overemphasize bombers and don't knock down the Japanese economy by actually controlling the convoy routes. And China finally gets snuffed on turn 5. Here we have a big confrontation. The remnants of the IJN going after the Pacific Fleet, main Pacific Fleet strike group. And see, here's another problem the Japanese are going to be faced with. See how they soak hits with their transports. And what happens when you lose transports? It cuts off the Continental Army. It starves it. So that's not good. It's all bad. I mean, obviously you can't just sit back and do nothing. But what I'm trying to say is they won the battle, perhaps, but their convoy routes have fallen. So it doesn't matter. It's over, actually. At this point, I'm playing a human opponent. I see they've taken China has fallen. They may even be making 3 points now. But I know they're screwed. Look at those convoy centers falling. They're all going to fall. They're all gone. That's kicking the Japanese player right where it hurts, in the pocketbook. So what good is that money if you can't put it in the bank and spend it? And their transport fleet is dead, so whatever you see on the continent is that's it. They might, I don't know, maybe they can build a couple of units infantry out of China. I think maybe that'd be a rule, but they certainly can't build more than what the British can out of India. So that's over. Game's over already, even though I wouldn't say that to a live opponent, like, because I'm not that jerky. I play just for the story, and I actually don't care if I win or lose, ever. I actually kind of like losing. It's funny. I don't try to lose, but if I do, hey, I lose more than I win in Axis and Allies live head-to-head anyways. On this campus, like, the staff, like ground staff or whatever, they all drive these golf carts that beep all the time. No one can, they're too lazy to walk, I guess. It's just constantly people driving around in golf carts. But it's nice to be outside. It's been a long time since I've made a video outside, so it feels good. Also, I'd also like to know what people do for, like, house rules if you use them. I'll show you what I do, obviously, in an upcoming video. But I'm so jealous of people that can paint their sets up and stuff. Oh man, like some of them are just awesome. I'm sometimes I'm tempted to flop out the money to get, I don't know, maybe buy a painted set since I'm not good enough to do it myself. But of all the ANAs that handle the Pacific, I would actually say, and even like the clones and the knockoffs, like and I haven't played all of those, but I want to. The World at Wars, all that stuff that I have seen so far, of all of those, I think ANA Pacific 01 has the best. It has the best I like the layout of the map. I don't necessarily like the graphic design of it. I think it's like so flat. That was another sort of criticism I had of this game when it came out. It was the first map that I thought was like blah kind of to look at. I like all the territories, and I like the Burma Road, and I and I just felt it was kind of uninspired. Like it's not really done by a true artist, in my opinion, which is a shame. Not like the original, or even Europe. Or Europe is, I found, somehow more attractive. As far as this game is concerned, though, specifically, it's over quick if Japan doesn't get lucky, if they don't know what they're doing. It is kind of I don't know. It's weird that I think that the game is more enjoyable solo, like just experimenting. It's really like kind of a pill to play, because if you're playing Japan with a group of guys, and I don't know, unless it's a really chill gaming experience, I don't know. I find it difficult to manage with all the pieces in the initial setup, early game, the fleet mark, like plaques and the stuff off board, and it's just and the first turn is like pretty slow, and I don't know. It's asymmetrical, the game, and asymmetrical in terms of what is kind of expected of the individual players of the game. So if you are prone to AP and overthinking and stuff, and you're playing Japan with a group of guys, man, it can be frustrating for a lot of players. It take forever. The first turn setup takes a while. First turn takes a ton of time, and you've been sitting there maybe for a couple hours and barely anything has happened. So yeah, there's advantages to playing this on the computer, no doubt, although nothing really can beat an ideal head-to-head with another person live. I'm just saying Pacific 01 can kind of really tax a person's patience when you first play it. And I should actually try. I've never tried taking ANA Europe and then ANA Pacific, and then using the fan-made like bridge print and play insert where you combine the two. I have to do that sometime. I don't know why I haven't done that yet. Just to kind of test it out. Would it be better than... Oh, I don't think it would be, but I don't think it'd be better than anything that has a global perspective. But who knows? But you can see in this, I mean, Once the Americans land on the coast of China, it's all downhill. I don't have an answer for the Japanese player at this point. So, we could just skip ahead. There's like no good decision to be made. It's like they would be sitting at about 11 victory points. They'd be about halfway there in this game. Average 2 a turn, I guess. I don't know. 2. They had a couple turns where it was 3, maybe 1 or 2 turns where it was 3. And yeah, it's all over. Like they only made it halfway. Of course, I mean and also if a if there's like a time sensitive element to Axis and Allies, like also with D-Day, there's always weirdness associated with that. Like as soon as you start imposing like victory point limits or turn limits, like one guy on BGG said, if you have a more philosophical perspective, then in a sense every Japanese unit is a kamikaze unit. Everything is disposable just to get you to that point, which is problematic because it's so radically not historical. It would be like saying after Pearl Harbor, the right move for the IJN is to attack San Diego, wiping itself out for some greater future benefit to the Kwangtung army, like to give the army generals in China more time, when that makes no sense. Like a Japanese admiral would never do that. They have options. They can still attack, the Aleutians. They can attack all sorts of weak spots. They would never send their men to certain death right after they scored a spectacular victory for even the emperor couldn't be convinced to make that type of decision, right? So that's another, I guess, potential problem. But anyway, I hope you learned something from this video. Hope you enjoyed it. I always have fun playing this game. And like I said before, I will make another video that covers my top 10 mods and alterations to the physical game board for this. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more content coming soon.